Russia's path versus United States path. Good afternoon. Unfortunately, the American government and its media, its mainstream media, are notorious liars. They push and promote their propaganda. But that's why AfriSynergyNews is here. It is here to unpack and present the truth to you, to analyze and produce the truth. So we're going to cover just an overview of what Fareed Zakaria had to say today in the news. Let's get started.
This is GPS, the Global Public Square. Welcome to all of you in the United States and around the world. I'm Fareed Zakaria. We have a great show for you today. We will discuss Vladimir Putin's moves in the Middle East, but also in Ukraine. This week, Dutch investigators released a damning report on the downing of the Malaysian Airlines passenger jet.
Okay, Vladimir Putin in the Near East, in Syria. Vladimir Putin and the Ukraine. As many of you know, the Ukraine, what happened there a couple or so years ago was sponsored, a coup sponsored by the United States government. Even the Deputy Secretary of State, she admitted and she stated that the United States spent $5 billion in the Ukraine. For what? That money could have gone to Ferguson, inner cities in America. But yet these Zionist bankers are promoting billions of dollars over in Eastern Europe on the border of Russia. Why? Well, a few years ago, John McCain threatened Vladimir Putin, told him that what happened to Muammar Gaddafi can happen to him, can happen to Putin. So they overthrew the legitimate government of the Ukraine and inserted their junta into power in the Ukraine. Russia then took back, with emphasis on the word back, the Crimea. They took Crimea back. Up until 1967, Crimea was a part of Russia. And then under Khrushchev, he gifted it on his own to the Ukraine. Now it's back in Russia's hand. Russia's building the bridges from Russia's mainland to Crimea. They're also building water pipelines to carry fresh water to Crimea because the junta in Kiev have turned off the water. They're not allowing that peninsula to receive water for crops, water for other needs. So when we talk about Vladimir Putin, we're talking about a man who is a statesman. We're talking about a man who adheres to international law. We're talking about a man who is in the ascendancy relative to his popularity around the world because people see him doing the right thing. Now, back to the Near East. The United States, as I've stated, for a number of years now, the United States has been backing and supporting and aiding terrorists in Syria, terrorists in Libya, terrorists in Iraq, along with the support of the Zionist State of Israel and other members of the NATO European countries. That's a reality. That's something that corporate mainstream media, in this case Fareed Zakaria, is not going to tell you. He would lose his job if he did. But since I'm not in this for money, I can tell you all of this. Tell you the truth. This is the truth. So, with America supporting all of these terrorists, calling these terrorists their assets, with the purpose of overthrowing yet another sovereign government, which is all and totally against the mission and the rules of the United Nations. This is what American leaders are doing. And then they use words such as, instead of calling them governments, the regime of Saddam Hussein, the regime of Assad, the regime. I mean, really, you the viewers of that garbage, are you going to be that ignorant? Or are you going to listen to and move and act and react upon the truth? And the truth is that Russia is wiping out the terrorists in Syria. And those terrorists, once again, have been backed by the West, backed by the United States. This includes the terrorists who were put into power in the Ukraine. And Russia is also indirectly dealing with them. But they want them to come to the table to talk peace. But the United States is really not for that. And then we have flight MH17, a flight that was shot down by the junta of Kiev in the Ukraine. And then they're talking about the Dutch. Well, the Dutch are the parent country of apartheid, what was formerly apartheid South Africa. Really? You going to believe those people? Really? Really? So they do an investigation. It's just like the cops here in America investigating the killings that they do within black communities, investigating themselves. Even the FBI has admitted that of all of the killings by cops in America, 99% of them do not even report it to the FBI. Now that says a lot. And for African Americans, it also says that you need to look at the African Americans Manifesto, which involves separation. Collectively, you're not getting any better. There are only a few of us who can rise in such a system. But collectively, you're not rising. So it is a point of separation. That requires a plan. That requires a document. That requires certain levels of negotiation and putting these points on the table. Because these people are not going to get any better. As Isaiah said in the Bible, in the 18th chapter of Isaiah, these are a people who are terrible and peeled, meaning pale skin, white. Terrible and peeled, terrible from their beginning to this very day. Overall, they are not going to change. Now you can have a power that equals or surpasses their power to force them to change, but that change would only be temporary. And then they would be back up to their old shenanigans. They would be back up to destroying and burning out black businesses, sabotaging black businesses. So we're talking about separation. That is the other part of the justice or else. This is the or else part of it. Now, let's continue on with what Zakari has to say with this.
I'll have an exclusive interview with Ukraine's President, Petro Poroshenko.
Remember now, Petro Poroshenko came into power after the junta had done its thing, after the coup in the Ukraine. Technically, he really isn't even legitimate, because the junta, with the support and backing of the United States government and other NATO states, they removed and forced the legitimate president out of power in the Ukraine. That's the reality. That's the truth, without the propaganda, without the lies.
Also, the terror threat to the American homeland. How has the emergence of ISIS changed the calculus of risk?
Well, that's nonsense. The terrorist threat to the homeland, to America. There is no terrorist threat to the United States. There is none, other than primarily and mostly America's own people, mainly pale-skinned men. Now, I've already proven long ago that the 9/11 attacks were carried out by the Zionist state of Israel and its Saudi friends, the House of Saud. That's a fact. That is the reality. So when we talk about terrorist threats to the homeland, that's just a bunch of wild-eyed propaganda. The biggest threat to America is a coup. You've got former generals who have tried to manipulate the situation here in the United States. Petraeus, General Allen, these men. So you could have a coup any day right here in the United States of America.
Then the terror threat across the Atlantic in Africa. Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta on the threats and ambitions of Somalia's indiscriminate killers, Al-Shabaab.
Well, Fareed is going to interview the president of Kenya. However, really his main angle is really to talk about the homosexual or gay agenda in Kenya, because Kenya put the plug on it when Obama was in Kenya earlier this year. Because, you know, Obama has been pushing in a very strong way the homosexual agenda in Africa. Africa is not about any of that. Now, you individuals, you as an individual, you can do whatever you want to do within your home sexually. If you want to be with men and you're a man, that's your business. If you want to be with women and you're a woman, that's your business. But to try to force nations to bend to the will of homosexuality is wrong. You don't get into the business of other cultures in that way. In every country of the world, there are homosexuals. There have always been homosexuals. And some people treat them bad and treat them wrong. Some people will even kill and harm them. That's dead wrong. At the same time, that community must not continue to try to enforce their will upon others. So you can have the extreme both ways. So Fareed Zakari, he's going to talk about Al-Shabaab in Somalia, which Al-Shabaab is really being defeated. It's going away. But his real angle is to bring up the gay agenda. That was his real angle in his conversation with Uhuru. of Kenya. And maybe later I will deal more in detail with that interview. Maybe. But let's continue on. Well, why is Washington acquiescent? Because the emperor has been found, has been caught with his clothes off, naked. America has been exposed for what they are, the sponsorers of terrorists. We saw it in Libya, we see it in Syria, and we see it in Iraq. Supporters of terrorists. That's why they're somewhat acquiescent. And the other reason why they're acquiescent is because Russia knows how to bite back. America has picked on small people. The bully has picked on the little guys. But they're not going to pick on Russia militarily. They cast their sanctions against Russia. But look at Russia. Russia comes out with its advanced military weaponry. Weapons where ships are firing missiles from the Caspian Sea 1,000 miles away and pinpointing and striking targets inside of Syria. That's something that's better than American technology. It's Tomahawk missiles. Russia comes in with its fourth generation fighter jets, striking targets in Syria, killing terrorists, putting them on the run, forcing some of them to give up the business as paid mercenaries of Western Zionist international bankers. This is the reality. So why is America acquiescent? Again, because they have been found with their pants down. They have been discovered naked. The truth is being seen by the world. That's why Vladimir Putin is growing in a way of popularity around the world. Very popular in Syria, very popular in Egypt, even very popular right here in the United States of America. Why? Because he has a moral compass. That's why.
It's true that it's been a quarter century since Moscow has been so interventionist outside its borders. The last time it made these kinds of moves in the late 1970s and 1980s, it invaded Afghanistan.
Okay, now, again, words. Fareed Zakari is dead wrong. The Soviet Union at that time, not Russia, but the Soviet Union at that time did not invade is the word, invade Afghanistan. The legitimate government of Afghanistan invited the Soviet military into Afghanistan. And that's when Zbigniew Brzezinski started, under President Carter, started associating and established terrorist groups. The Mujahideen, Al-Qaeda, which Mujahideen became known as the Taliban. These were people trained by the American government, by the CIA. And now the United States government killed some of them. They're killing them. I mean, really, why would you want to be an ally with someone today who's going to kill you tomorrow? Really, that's insane. But that is the case. The same is true with ISIS. ISIS, the so-called ISIS, supported, propped up by Erdogan, who is the Prime Minister of Turkey. He and his family are profiting from, and were profiting from, the oil that was being stolen from Iraq and parts of Syria. Turkey, Erdogan. That's why Turkey raised such a big fuss about Russia bombing these terrorists inside of Syria, because Russia was getting into Erdogan's pocketbook. All the money that they were earning from this illegal oil coming out of Syria and coming out of especially Iraq by these terrorists. And Turkey would have no chance against Russia. So it should stop all the threats. That's what it should do. But I don't expect Erdogan to do that unless a bomb is dropped on him. Well, let's look at that. Let's look at the merits of that statement, that Moscow was winning the Cold War. Because there were at least 50 countries in Africa who were under colonial rule. It was the Soviet Union, along with China, along with Cuba, who helped liberate those countries from European and American colonialism. That's right. So when we talk about the Cold War and we talk about winning and losing, the Europeans, for the most part, were kicked out. Now they're back, but they're back in a different way. Unfortunately, through and with some of the corrupt leaders in some of the countries in Africa, they still maintain a certain iron grip on those countries. But let's not forget that it was the Soviets, the commies, who helped liberate many African countries. And I asked the question what I've asked long ago. How many of those communist countries enslaved Africans? Did the Russians enslave you? No, they did not. Did the Chinese enslave you? No, they did not. So, if you as African American people, Afro-Brazilians, those of you brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, if you want to rise, then you're going to have to seek out the right partnerships, the right friends. You don't have a military. You don't have fighter planes. You don't produce bombs. You don't produce any of those things. Now, had you had those things, the destruction of Black Wall Street in Oklahoma would not have happened. The destruction of Rosewood in Florida would not have happened. You have to be wise. And you have to first show yourself friendly. This talk of we black people, we have no friends. That's stupidity. That's sick self-pity. You have no friends because you think it. Because you do not look at ways to establish mutual interests, friendship.
Now, how did that work out for the Soviet Union?
So Fareed Zakari asked the question, now how did that work out for the Soviet Union? Well, the reality is this. The United States has been in Afghanistan longer, far longer than the Soviet Union was there. And they haven't won anything. In fact, now recently, the United States is saying that they're going to extend their stay in Afghanistan. Now the question should be, how has that worked out for the United States? The Soviet Union is gone. But Russia is stronger today than it was under the Soviet Union. That's a fact. That's a reality. It is more nimble. It doesn't have the burden of many of the other poor states that were a part of the Soviet Union. Not even the sanctions cast against Russia by the United States and other members of the NATO states is effective. Look at Russia. I estimated that within 2 months, Russia will wipe out the terrorists in Syria. That's right. And when they do that, well, what will happen next? That's a good question. And to some out in cyber world, on my Facebook page, I've indicated that the Zionist entity in Israel could very well eventually be a target. That's right. Why? Because the Zionist entity obey no United Nations rules or resolutions. They obey none of that. And what Russia and China and other nations are beginning to do, they are beginning to be enforcers of the rules, the mission of the United Nations. That's right. So what you see happening in the Zionist state right now in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, is not a fluke. The Zionist entity is a European outpost. An outpost set up by squatters, set up by land thieves, no different than those who went to Australia, no different from those criminals who were brought to North America. No different. They're squatters, they're thieves. But the only difference is that in the Zionist state, they proclaim themselves to be Jews, but they're not. As Christ said in the Bible's book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 2 verses 9 and chapter 3 verse 9, I know your works, I know your tribulations, I know your poverty, but you are rich, talking about the real Jews, the real ones, the so-called Negroes, the ones who were scattered into the four corners of the earth, into captivity, into slavery, as the prophets had indicated, had written long ago, carried into the lands and the nations of the Gentiles. Now, who are the Gentiles? Read Genesis 9 and Genesis 10. That's when you learn who the Gentiles are. The Gentiles are not you. The Ashkenazim are the Gentiles. Ashkenazim come from? It came from the biblical name Ashkenaz, who was the grandson of Japheth in the Bible. Genesis, the chapter of Genesis, the book of Genesis. So when we talk about black liberation, there are some of you out there who have been bamboozled, tricked, and fooled, and the wool has been pulled over your eyes, and you say and you state that the Bible is the white man's book. The white man would never write that his skin, his pigmentation is a curse, as it was written where? In the Bible. Numbers the 12th chapter, Leviticus the 13th chapter talks about white skin and blonde hair. 2 Kings the 5th chapter talks about white skin being a curse, not a blessing. Pale-skinned people tell you Africans, your oil is a curse. And then you stupid idiots, you repeat it. You regurgitate it. Oil is a curse. Diamonds is a curse. You fools, you idiots. Are you so gullible? You know, more than 10 years ago I talked about this. No wonder some of you state, the man is coming, the man. Meaning that you, the black man, that you are a boy. Because the man was a term that meant the white man. It's time out for this stupidity. It's time out for being led by teachers who have not been taught properly. It's time out for being led by teachers and even some religious leaders who will not teach you the whole truth. Some of you just learned something that's in the Bible, that has been in the Bible for thousands of years, that you've never heard your black minister, that you've never heard your black imam tell you about, say anything to you about. The Bible is a white man's book. No white man, once again, will write in his book that his skin is a curse. Your ancestors wrote that. And then you got some of the brothers who you're off into Egyptology. That's fine and good. But the fact is, what's in that Bible originated out of Africa, out of Egypt, and before Egypt, out of areas down on farther south of Egypt, in Ethiopia and other places in Africa. So what am I saying? I am saying that we as black people have to come out of the malaise of ignorance. We have to be a learned people. We have to use our intellect. You're born intelligent. When your children are born, your infants, they're born, their heads are up, their eyes are open, they're looking around. You be careful of what those doctors inject your infants with in the hospital. They give your infants shots that they do not give to their pale-skinned infants, which slows down the mind and the thinking of your children. Oh, he's got ADD. Now, some of you right now, I've heard a few of you say, "Oh, T. West, you talk so slow. Oh, T. West, oh." Now, I already know that many of those of you who are like that, that you are examples of attention deficit disorder. You're that instant. You want things instantly. You want something that's loud and blah, 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 blah. And when you add it all up, you didn't get nothing. All you got was a quick fix. It's like a cocaine hit. It's like a heroin high, an LSD high. You need to and you must have something of substance. Don't listen to false teachers. Don't listen to people who are going to misguide you. Oh, the black church is the enemy. The black church is the enemy. The black church is not perfect, but it definitely is not the enemy. Now, you do have individuals within the black church who are the enemies, among the enemies, working with the enemies. But to just, with a broad brush, the black church is the enemy. They're the bullies. They're the bullies. Some of you learn the word, oh, the bully, the bully, the bully. And you just regurgitate it. You talk about it. You talk about it. I remember before most of you knew anything about a false flag attack, before you knew anything about the red herring attack, before you knew anything about those words, you weren't saying anything about it. But then, one of your teachers started saying something about it, and then all of a sudden, boop, everything's a false flag. Oh, that's a false flag. Oh. You evaluate things based upon analysis. Hard analysis. Now, if you've got attention deficit disorder, which, as I said, many of you do, then you don't have time to analyze anything. You don't have time to think critically. You want your instant gratification. You want your instant fix. You don't have the patience to learn it, to internalize it, to understand it. That's why the prophet said long ago, out of everything that you get, out of all you're getting, get what? Get an understanding. Understand what? Understand yourself first. And then understand your enemy. Study your enemy. Know his weakness. Know his strengths. Study those who you can become friends and allies with. But that's not for you, those of you who have attention deficit disorder. You can't pay attention to anything too long. You're running here and there. Over here, over there. You're going everywhere. Getting nothing. Running to and fro. Lost. Thinking you're found. Thinking you know what you know, and you know that you know it, and you don't know anything. And you wonder why you're not moving forward. But some of you are so bad off that you don't even know that. You think you're moving forward, and you're standing still. Now let's get on back to this. Russia's path versus United States path. Let's close this out. Well, now, look. Russia's activity in Syria is definitely achievement. Achievement. Because, why? Because it was done and it is being conducted under truthful, under honest grounds. Not dishonest pretexts, as is the case with the United States and its allies. Nothing ultimately good can become of anything that is built upon falsehood, that is built upon corruption. Nigeria is facing the hell that it's facing because it has, for centuries, its people, its leaders have embraced the master criminals, the arch criminals, for centuries. And they're still embracing that. Oh, we're going to invite the United States military into Cameroon to help fight Boko Haram. How long have they been there? How long have they been helping you fight Boko Haram? How much progress have you made in fighting Boko Haram? It was only in Somalia after Kenya and other members of African states decided that they were going to put an end to that Wahhabi nonsense in Somalia that things started moving forward more positively in Somalia. Now, America being the criminal that it is, and there are some others also who are bombing areas in Somalia still to this day with drones and aircraft. There's a secret, and has been a secret, CIA, well, it's not so secret, prison and torture area in Mogadishu. These are topics that I covered years ago. I mean, there's been a vast number of topics that I've covered related to domestic matters right here in the United States, all the way to international matters around the world. Should black people, should African Americans be involved in international matters? Hell yes. It's not just a black thing. And that's mainly one of the main reasons why you're usually behind the 8 ball. Because you are not aware of global issues that affects you in your black communities right here in the United States of America. I stated many years ago that if Africans and African Americans and the diaspora people want to rise up and want to be a great people and progress, that they must work together. How? That they must leverage their strengths. How? You don't know how unless you know what your strengths are. You know, I went to the Justice or Else gathering And then on the sidelines on the following day on Sunday at the hotel there, we had a side discussion. And it is amazing how lost so many of you are. It is amazing how many of you come up with ideas of doing the same thing over and over again. As I was in this round table discussion with a group of people, most of them were college students going to college. Most of them was going to Xavier. And there were a few older brothers and sisters there. The few older brothers and sisters, I'm sorry to say, but then again, I'm really not sorry to say because it happens so often. They were misleading, misguiding, for the most part, these younger brothers and sisters. So I asked the question, what country exports the largest amount of cocoa beans in the world? None of them had the right answer. They all thought it was some African or South American country. I asked the question, what country exports the largest amount of cocoa beans or coffee beans in the world? Still, wrong answer. What country exports the largest amount of diamonds in the world? Again, wrong answer. They were thinking diamonds, oh, Africa. No, it's not an African country that exports the largest amount of diamonds in the world. These are European countries, followed by Israel. And for cocoa beans, it is the Netherlands. But where are they sourcing it from? Where are they getting it from? They're getting it from Africa. Africa has by far, bar no other country, the next closest country would be Russia, had the largest amount of raw resources, unique raw resources in the world. Now, that's right, raw resources in the world. So what did I say to these young people and these older people who didn't have any answers for these young people? I said, now, the way other nations become rich, no nation had become rich without going through Africa. No people have become rich and wealthy without first going through Africa. Abraham, before his name was Abraham, it was Abram. But when he went into the land of Ham, who was a father of many nations, Abram became rich and wealthy. Europeans today become rich and wealthy. The Chinese today become rich and wealthy. Now for you, the attention deficit African Americans, Afro-Brazilians, you Caribbean brothers and sisters, I didn't lose nothing in Africa. Africa ain't got nothing for me. Well, as I said, all nations have become great by going through Africa. They have told you that your black skin is a curse. Your diamonds are a curse. Your black oil in the ground is a curse. And you believed it. You believed it. Muammar Gaddafi. Why did they kill him? Savagely kill him. Make an example of him. Why? They did it because he was trying to do the right thing for Africa. Now just lost some of the dumb Negroes because your teachers taught you wrong. They taught you that all Arabs, the only Arab is a dead Arab. Well, Gaddafi was a mixed man. You know, in the last program that I did on the AfriSynergy channel, there's a little clip in there with Dr. John Henry Clark. And he's talking about Cleopatra the Seventh. You should listen to it because it contradicts what some of you have been trying to use when you use the words of Dr. Clark. to lambaste people in North Africa, even people in East Africa. It contradicts all of that. Dr. Clark states that Cleopatra VII was likely of Greco-Persian extract, but she was African. Culturally, she was African. Why? Because her heart was Africa. Because she was for Africa. Because she was doing the things that would best benefit Egypt. Now, do you understand what I just said?
There's some indication that her mother was Persian and her father was Greek. She was African in that she had African loyalty and African commitment. And she was, at an early age, an astute politician. Her manipulation of Caesar and Mark Antony kept the worst aspect of Roman rule from the backs of Africa. And Egypt enjoyed the status of a protectorate as being an out-and-out colony. This is where some consideration in history, and Cleopatra VII is worth some consideration as an African person because of this maneuver and because of this African loyalty. We cannot say that her period in history was totally without value to African people. So culturally, religiously, and in commitment, she belongs to Africa. Though there is in all probability that she could have been lacking in African blood.
Some of you don't get it unless your teacher said it. So go on back and listen to what Dr. Clark had to say about that. And then think about the great works that Muammar Gaddafi had done and was doing in Africa up until the period of his death. That's why Nelson Mandela esteemed Muammar Gaddafi so highly, because he helped liberate South Africa from apartheid. He sent money. Not only money, he sent arms, weapons. How many of you can send weapons? How many of you? Many of you like to run your mouth, but you don't have nothing but your mouth. You don't have substance. So all you can do is talk. And that isn't too good because you don't have a well-rounded knowledge enough to be talking effectively. Moving on. Well, one thing Zakari said that's correct. Russia and Iran, they are the power brokers now in the Near East. That's a fact. Why? Because Russia they have the moral high ground. That's right. The moral high ground. So the rest of what Zakari has to say, nah, throw it out. Doesn't apply to the real situation. A minority regime. The United States, Britain, France, they have made a killing, a history of embracing and putting into power minority groups all throughout Africa and elsewhere as well, but especially Africa. So all of this is hypocrisy. Oh, Assad, he's with the Alawites. He's a minority group. So the hell what? Barack Obama is a member of a minority group. White mother, black father. So the hell what? That does not mean that you cannot rule. Hypocrisy. That's a damn lie. Supported by vast sections of the Syrian population. A damn lie. Those terrorists are not supported by the Syrian population. Zakari wants to get paid. He's paid well to lie on CNN. Now, he's not nearly as bad as some of the others, such as Paul Wolfowitz, not Wolfowitz, but a Wolf Blitzer. He's not as bad as that guy, but he's lying right here. That's a fact. If Russia wins somehow, Russia has already won. Those terrorists aren't going anywhere except they give up or they're killed. That's the bottom line. That's the reality. So when he talks about Syria is not a prize, it will just be a cauldron. In other words, we Americans with our terrorist boots on the ground will leave Syria in ruins. That was their intent in the first place. Just like they did in Libya. That was their intent. The old hussy, Hillary Clinton. We came, we saw, and he died. Sadistic, evil savages. And if I was any of you African Americans, I wouldn't be caught associating with Hillary Clinton. Now that's a good question. And then Zakari, it's good for him that he is now going to lay out what happened where the United States went. What happened in Iraq? What happened in Libya? What happened or what is happening in Yemen? And that's a proxy deal there where the Saudis are killing the poor people of Yemen, the richest Arab country, destroying and killing the people of the poorest Arab country. Now what's wrong with that damn picture? What's wrong with it? And I've always said that the House of Saud are Zionists. They will never attack the state of Israel. Never. You don't see Wahhabis attack the Israelis. Why? Because they work together. That's why. They talk all this nonsense, but they will never attack the Zionist state, ever. The only Arab state that attacked the Zionist state in the last 25 years, 30 years, was Iraq, under Saddam Hussein. And here's a fact about Saddam Hussein. Iraq under Saddam Hussein. Under Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi people were the most educated of all people in the Near East. The most educated. Women had rights in Iraq. Let's go to Libya. Same thing. Let's go to Syria. Same thing. So the United States, Britain, France, and all of these Anglos and these cousins, these savages, these terrible and peeled people, as Isaiah said in the 18th chapter of Isaiah, they are overthrowing nations that are not extreme. Saudi Arabia is extreme. Look at how they treat their women. Look at how they cut people's heads and hands and etc. off. And then you see all of these nations that America has gone into, they become extreme. Now, you know a duck by the way it walks and by the way it quacks. And where did that lead you to? Where? You got over 4,000 Americans who were killed in there. And it was more than 100 and some thousand that Zakari is quoting here. It was over 1 million people killed, mostly civilians, in Iraq by American and its so-called coalition bombs. So, on these two situations, which are not imaginary, they're real, they're reality, we must conclude that America brings death, destruction, and suffering. That is counter to what the United Nations preamble is all about. War crimes. War crimes. And the Zionist state of Israel, the European outpost, is doing the same thing to the Palestinian people. And it's time for you, the African Americans, the black diaspora, to stand with the Palestinian people, just as they stood against apartheid in South Africa. Now that's Fareed Zakari's conclusion. Very flawed. Very, very flawed. Putin's reality is being written right now. Now, Syria will rebuild, but make no doubt about it. Russia is going to annihilate those terrorists in Syria, and they're going to do it in a record amount of time. And then after Russia does that, Russia will become the superhero in that region of the world. No doubt about it. At that time, Russia will then be in a position to say to the Zionist European outpost known as Israel, get your act together, stop slaughtering the Palestinian people, embrace the Palestinian state, or else. And Russia will not be alone, because China and other nations will be behind them. This is T. West with AfriSynergy.